Alright guys, my name is Christian and I am back here with another video, and I wanted to go over my process of mixing drums inside of Pro Tools. And I think that's a very important topic that a lot of people would like research on and would like some answers on, and it's one of the things that I mostly looked up when I was starting out mixing, because it could be tricky working with multiple mics on this extremely loud acoustic kit. So first things first, I have my session in here. This was the session that I used, or actually recorded, the other day at a church. And the interesting thing about this these drum tracks is the drummer was in a plexiglass cage. And it's not the most ideal for recording, but that's all we had. And there's a few things that I'm going to show you, like the snare in particular, that I wish we could have did different or could have retracked, but it was for the sake of time. It was a live recording. It wasn't a studio setting. So I just had to work with what I was given. And yeah, so my process is here I dumped all the drum tracks in. I color coded it. This is the color that I like to use. I've always used this honey gold color. And I also created a group down here for the drum, so I can select and solo or mute all of them at once if I need to. So yeah, let's get started. So the first thing that I did was put them in order. I have my kicks, my snare, hi-hat, rack, tom, floor, tom overheads. You're going to notice that I have a drum bus over here. What I did for this was I created a stereo aux track, and for the input I just went to bus 9 and 10 and I named it drum bus, and then I sent all my drum tracks to this, and this helps kind of beef it up some. That's one of the tricks that I like to use. Now in the case of this, since this is a live recording, I usually don't do this. For the sake of the video, in a studio setting and you want fat sounding drums, this is a nice little trick you can do. So as you can see up here, we have the SSL-G channel strip, one of my favorite plugins across all of them. This is the plugin that I usually go to. I think it gives the drums, or anything you put this plugin on, sounding great. So we'll listen to the drums with this muted, and then we'll bypass Command Option click. We'll bypass everything, and let's take a listen. So that's what the drum tracks sound like, raw, straight out of the recording. No processing, nothing done to them, just kind of leveled out a bit how I see fit. That's it. So just to kind of show you how big of a difference this aux track, this drum bus makes, we'll unmute it, and then we'll do this. And now let's listen to it. Not too bad, not too bad. It could still use some work. Again, the processing is still bypassed. So now let's listen to it with the processing on. Alright, so that's with everything on, and I wanted to go through some of the EQ changes that I did and the compression settings that I put on, because EQ and compression are key when it comes to mixing your drums. So let's take a look at the kick drum. We have the kick in mic. So the whole purpose of this microphone is to capture the beater. And so if you take a look at my settings, I have the lows rolled off from 50 and below, and then I have the highs rolled off from 10K to about 20K. And then I like to boost it just below. I think I originally had it around 9. You can boost it around 9K to kind of bring out the beater a little bit. It doesn't have to be boosted super high. I only have it around 3 dB. And then for the high mids and the low mids, I scooped out, I tightened up my Q right here. Your bell curve, how thin it is, your Q. I tightened it up and I boosted the dB, the gain, all the way up. And then I swept through the frequencies. And I found that around 300 gave me problems, so I dipped out. And then I found out that around almost 700 gave me problems, so I also dipped that out, while also kind of boosting to give the kick drum a little more beef to it. Compression wise, I have the threshold set at -10. The threshold is essentially, the way it works is if when your signal hits whatever your threshold is, that's when the compression starts to take place. And so I have it at -10 because if you look, let's take a look at the kick right now. So you can see that the kick drum is consistently -10 and up. So if it's easily hitting -10, I want the threshold to be at -10. The ratio, I have it around 4 to 1, which is a pretty common ratio to have on a kick drum. Some people push it up to 5, but I like 4. And then a somewhat fast attack. And that's it for my kick drum. The kick out drum is similar, except minus the high end of the beater. So we had a microphone on the outside of the kick drum capturing the low resonance frequencies. So I dipped out what I thought was muddy and boxy, which in this case was about 800 and 200. I scooped out while also boosting around 70, and I have up 3K to 20K rolled off. Compression settings are pretty similar, except I have the threshold up to -15 this time around. So the snare drum was a little tricky. Like I said, this was not a studio setting, and if it was up to me, I would have liked to retract some of the drums. Let's take a listen. I believe that the snare around this area was sounding a little funky, a little ringy. You can hear some of the ringiness right now. And so in that case, I would have liked to retract it, maybe adjust at the microphone, but I was given what I was given. And so for the snare, I have it boosted around 2K to give it some crack, and then I scooped out around 600, and around 250 I have it scooped out. And then to give it some body, if you do between like 120 and 240, just boost it ever so slightly. You give the snare some body if it's lacking. I didn't compress the snare. Hi-hats and overheads, I usually treat the same in a studio setting. I try to go for scooping a lot of the lows out to get rid of the kick drum and snare drum as much as possible, and just pretty much have it be a solely hi-hat mic or a cymbals microphone for overheads. So hi-hats, you could just scoop out a lot of the lows. As you can see here, I have around 300 scooped out. High mids, I have around 2.3K scooped out. Tight Qs. I even scooped out some of the lows here. And then from 300 down to 20, I have rolled off. That was the overheads. And so for the hi-hat, it's probably going to look a little bit similar. Yep, so 300 to 20 I have rolled off, and then I have some of these harsher frequencies up higher. So from 12K to 20K I have rolled off, and then I have around 700 rolled off, and then I have around 200 rolled off tight Qs, and then I boosted some of the highs at around 10K ever so slightly, just to give it some shimmer, not too harsh. And then I rolled off some of the low end to get rid of that kick drum. So this is what the overheads sound like. So you can really hear the crash and the ride really well, and even though you can still hear the kick drum and the snare, it really comes in when the drummer is using the ride and the crash cymbals. And then if we take a look at the hi-hat, same thing. So it's mainly just to capture the hi-hat microphone. You will still get some bleed, but it's mainly capturing that high end. For the toms, in the studio sense, I would like to get rid of anything on the tom tracks, rack tom and floor tom, that are not the toms themselves. For example, if we take this random section, you can hear a fair bit of the drums as bleed, and then when you see a higher transient, that's most likely the tom right there. And same rule applies for the floor tom. So that's the floor tom right there. That transient right there is the floor tom. And so anytime you can see spikes like that in the transients on the tom mics, that's a good sign. That's where your tom hit is actually at. Anything else you can scrap. Command E in between. You can Command M the sections and mute it, or you can get rid of it totally. I like to get rid of it. It tightens up the kit. It gets rid of additional noise. It makes your drum mix not so muddy. For the sake of this video and this demonstration, since this was a live recording, for a live session, a live band performance, where I mixed guitars and bass and keys and everything else along with these drums. I just took the drums for this video demonstration. I kept them in there. That's why they're still in there. Otherwise, I would have taken them out. And I may have some drum sessions where I did take out some of the filler noise on the tom tracks, which we can go over in another video, just to kind of show you from scratch how I do my drums. But this is my process for EQing and compressing my drums. I hope you found it useful. Let's take a listen again without the effects and without the drum bus, and just compare it one more time. So this is raw. And that is my process, and I hope you found it useful. If you did, feel free to click like and subscribe to the channel, where we'll be giving more tutorials just like this on Pro Tools and maybe on Logic too. as well as follow me on Twitter. I'll post the links in between, or between the comments in the description. Also, I'll post a link to a website that actually has a reference guide for EQ for people who are just starting to learn how to mix or just want help on certain instruments on where to start. By all means, use the guide, use the cheat sheet, but not as a definitive thing. The cheat sheets are just a guide to help you get in the right direction, not answers to questions themselves, because everyone tracks differently. You know, everyone has different instruments and people mic things differently, so don't take the cheat sheet as Bible. Simply use it as a guide. Ultimately, use your ears, use your creativity, and I hope you have a good one.